So hello, everyone. Max Herzog, Program Manager with Cleveland Water Alliance, and I'm happy to welcome you to this month's edition of Water Data Forum. Today's session will be focused on driving digital security across the water sector. Water Data Forum is a monthly series that's running throughout 2021 that's presented in partnership with Cleveland Water Alliance, the Midwest Big Data Innovation Hub, and the Water Environment Federation. The purpose of this series is really just to examine different different topics in the world of water data and to demystify those topics for both expert audiences and lay folks alike. So thank you all for joining our session today, and we hope to see you again in our future sessions. As we dive into the panel today, please keep in mind that you can submit your questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Please do use that Q&A box versus the chat to make sure that the panelists are seeing your questions, and feel free to submit those throughout the conversation as those questions come to you. We will be referencing them at the end, so we'll be sure to get to as many of those as we can. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce our facilitator for today's conversation. Elkin Hernandez is the Director of Maintenance Services for DC Water, as well as the Chair of the WEF Intelligent Water Technology Committee. With that, it's my great pleasure to hand things over to Elkin to introduce the rest of our panel and dive into today's conversation. Elkin?
Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for attending this webinar, and thanks, Max. So today we're going to have a discussion about digital security across the water sector, and for that, with that purpose, we have we got together an extremely qualified set of panel members. Certainly, it's an honor for me to be able to have a discussion with them and learn from what they have to say. Today we have David Travers. He's the Director of Water Security, the Water Security Division with the U.S. EPA Office of Water. We also have Mr. Michael Arnaud. He is the Managing Director of the Water ICEAC and also of the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies. Jim McCarty. He's with NIST, and he's a Senior Security Engineer with the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. And we also have Mr. Mark Montgomery. He's the Executive Director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and he's a retired Rear Admiral of the U.S. Navy. With that said, we'll start with the first. The way we're going to manage the discussion is we're going to have a series of individual presentations from each one of the panel members, and at the end, we're going to open the floor to a discussion about the different topics that are presented, and also to a Q&A session. So you guys can send out your questions. We'll try to go through them as time allows. So we're going to start with Mr. Michael Arnaud. Michael Arnaud has worked in the water sector since 1995. He is currently the Managing Director of the Water Information Sharing and Analysis Center, Water ICEAC, as well as the Chief Operating Officer of the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies. Michael and his teams deliver of a steady flow of actionable and practical resources to its water and wastewater utility members and other water sectors and government professionals. There's a good chance that if you are subscribed to the Water ICEAC, you get an email from them on a daily or weekly basis related to security. Prior to joining the water sector, Michael worked for former U.S. Senator John Brooks and served as an intelligence specialist in the U.S. Navy. With that said, I'll give the floor to Michael. Welcome, Michael. Michael, I think you remain muted. Thank you.
Sorry, after all these days. Thank you so much for having me, Elkin, and thank you to WEF and the Alliance and the Innovation Hub. I'm happy to be here, and I think it's a really timely topic. Cybersecurity is, We're seeing more incidents, or at least reports of incidents. We're seeing more sophisticated hackers, and we're seeing the sector itself asking for more resources, which is terrific. And of course, Congress and the federal agencies are interested more than ever in cybersecurity, including in the water sector. So today I'll talk a little bit about Water ICEAC and talk about some incidents and also some observations about the sector. First, a little bit about ICEACs in general. So we're one of 26 ICEACs created at the urging of a presidential order back in 1998, and it's focused on the critical infrastructure sectors. Most ICEACs are privately operated, and all, of course, are voluntary. Other ICEACs exist, as I mentioned. There's the electricity ICEAC and aviation, automotive. There's even one called space ICEAC. We were created in 2002 at the urging of US EPA and the FBI, and created by utilities and governed by utilities. And we're the only entity out here that is focused solely on the water and wastewater sector. And we're a nonprofit, and we're dues-based. So we rely on member dues to operate. Our goal, our mission is to help water and wastewater systems improve their cybersecurity, their physical security, resilience, by providing them with threat advisories and mitigation, best practices, things like that. And we're focused on all hazards, IT and ICS, of course, but also physical security, such as terrorism and sabotage, and natural disasters like hurricanes, and then public health as well, like COVID-19. So we're providing information about those threats and information on recovery and best practices and things like that. We are primarily comprised of water and wastewater systems, all system sizes. Some serve just a few thousand people. Our largest serves 19 million people in California. And 206 million Americans are served by utilities that belong to Water ICEAC. We also welcome membership by the engineering and consulting firms and government agencies and associations that are in the sector, because really security is a team effort. We provide a number of services to the members and to the sector at large, not just members, but primarily to the members. Threat advisories, threat and incident analysis, best practices, webinars, and we have a robust online library that it's got thousands of documents and articles in it that's there. It's in some cases it's open to the public. In some cases, if the information is sensitive, it's limited to members only. And we get our information from lots of different sources. We work closely with EPA and DHS, CISA, FBI, Intel community, other federal agencies, many other non-federal agencies, the private sector, including utilities, but subject matter experts. And we also comb the internet and social media for information about incidents. And we're drinking from a fire hose, our analysts are, and there's just so much information. I think if you try to subscribe to all the things that we subscribe to, you'd be overwhelmed, but we sort through it and filter out what's not relevant to the sector, figure out what is relevant and deliver that to the members. One of the products that we have that's free to the sector, to anybody, is our 15 cybersecurity fundamentals for water and wastewater utilities. And that's a guide that is about best practices for IT and OT security. It's got an overview on things that really every utility ought to be doing. And then it's got some links to help learn about those things. And then we also, in the realm of cybersecurity resources, we conduct monthly cyber threat briefings where we have subject matter experts talking about the latest incidents or threats and providing information about recovering. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat here. Now let's talk a little bit about sector incidents. So we collect incidents from our members, from non-members. We conduct surveys as well. And all of this information is reported to us confidentially. We protect information that's shared with us. We're not a government entity. We're not subject to FOIA or sunshine laws or anything like that. And then we ask for permission from the submitter, from the utility or otherwise, whether we can use that information in a report or advisory. And so we anonymize it and provide that information to the rest of the membership in the form of advisories or quarterly incident summaries. And it gives a sense to utilities of the types of threats and that are out there and that can, incidents that can happen, that can occur. We encourage utilities. I mean, information sharing is in our name, and we're very committed to encouraging utilities to share information. And you know, it really helps everybody when utilities indicate that, say, they've suffered a ransomware incident or worse. You know, I think when incidents are reported closer to home, you pay more attention. And I think that's the case in the sector, our sector. So we encourage incident sharing because it helps us refine our products for members to help them be secure. It helps other members understand better the threat landscape. So we encourage incident sharing, and people, our members do that on our website. We have a report an incident button, and there you can also figure out how to report to to FBI and DHS if you so choose. But reporting to us really helps the sector understand what's going on out there. So in terms of actual incidents, on the left are just 3 ICS incidents that have happened recently. Everyone knows about Oldsmar. A more recent one took place in Kansas, and we learned about that because of a U.S. attorney's indictment against the alleged actor. This involved basically a disgruntled contractor who maintained access to the OT system after leaving his job or leaving the contract. So allegedly he tried to, or maybe even successfully, shut down the treatment process. It's not clear from the indictment exactly what he did, but it was pretty serious. And then last year, there were a couple of sets of incidents in Israel where hackers targeted water facilities. So I should change this to read recent water ICS incidents because there are other incidents out there. And there are other water ICS incidents that are not mentioned here. There aren't that many reported. And whether they're reported or not, we're not really hearing of any incidents where the public was harmed. And then on the right side of the screen are IT incidents that could happen, have happened to any business of any kind. We're no different from being subject to them. But they do happen, they do cost money, they do cost time, and we like to let our members know when these types of incidents occur so they can implement best practices to reduce these types of things from happening in the future. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about some observations that we've made about the sector in terms of cybersecurity. We've done some recent polling with our sector associations like WEF, and we've had several hundred responses to a survey. And what we've learned, among other things, is that there's a majority of utilities reporting high or medium engagement by leadership in cybersecurity issues. And we define that by cybersecurity being a presence on the, say, the council or the board's agenda at each meeting, or regularly at least. So, so it's great to see 64% of respondents reporting that. Of course, that means there are a lot more that that have leadership that aren't putting cybersecurity at such a high priority. And then 57% of respondents have cybersecurity as part of a risk management plan. And of course, that really ought to be 100%. One day we'll get there. Not sure what the hurdle is exactly, but a majority of utilities are focused on cybersecurity, so that's good. We also asked utilities about their top risk management challenges or cyber risk management challenges, and these 5 rose to the top. Assessing risks and minimizing control system exposure, planning for incidents, awareness of threats and best practices, and creating a cybersecurity culture. So these are things that utilities are saying are priorities for them. And I think they're also saying that these are challenges in the sense that there's more work to be done to get there. And I look at the 4th one and kind of scratch my head and I have to remember that not everybody knows what Water ICEAC is, but number 4 is exactly what we do. And of course, we hope and we're glad to see that awareness of threats is a top concern. So that's really a big step. And then we also asked respondents about their practices around different things in terms of cybersecurity. And we learned, of course, I said, more engagement is needed by leaders and boards. Utilities need to increase their cybersecurity awareness training and develop a cybersecurity culture. We found that most participants did not participate in tabletops, drills, or exercises. And I think part of that is that there really aren't that many tabletops, drills, and exercises to participate in. So I think that's a need that we can try to fill as a sector. And then we also learned that greater protection of OT and IT assets is called for. There's not enough at all utilities, so we hope that changes. And we also asked utilities what their needs are in terms of cybersecurity, and these 4 rose to the top. More training and education, more technical assistance, advice, and assessments, more cyber threat information, and then federal grants and loans. Now, the first 3, there is some of this provided by different agencies or Water ICEAC or AWA, but I think what they're telling us is that there's just not enough of it. And given the size of the sector, 16,000 wastewater systems, 50,000 drinking water systems, there's a lot of room to grow in terms of these things. And of course, there really aren't that many opportunities for grants and loans. I think that's something that's on the horizon, but not just yet. So I've given you a quick overview of sector security and Water ICEAC itself. If you're interested in learning more about us, just visit us at watericeac.org. You can give us a test drive if you want to sign up for a 60-day free trial. And you can sign up as many staff as you want. There's no extra charge for that. So I encourage you to give us a shout and just see what, so we see what we can do for you. And I can be reached at this information here. So that's all I've got, Elkin. Thank you.
Well, Well, thanks, Michael. So we have some questions coming, and we'll hold them until the end of the presentations. Thanks, Michael. My next panelist is Mr. David Travers. David serves as director of the U.S. EPA Water Security Division, which has the mission to enhance the security and resiliency of the nation's drinking water and wastewater systems against all hazards. So he doesn't go just not cyber, but all the hazards. They go from natural disasters to malevolent acts. Through tools, training, and technical assistance, David has that's the mission of his division. David has been with EPA for over 20 years. Prior to joining EPA, David received a PhD in environmental engineering sciences and a master's of public health from the University of Michigan. He also holds a bachelor's in history from the University of Chicago. With that said, David, welcome today.
Thank you. Alcon, can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Wonderful. Good day, everyone. I am sharing my video, but I'm actually on leave this week, as I explained to the other panelists just prior to opening the webinar. I'm visiting family for the first time in about 14 months, and I'm participating on this webinar from rural South Carolina, where fiber optic cable is not really a thing. So apologies if I freeze in a virtual sense, at least. So Max, my understanding is that you will share the slides that I have, given the suspect nature of my internet connection. I'll ask you to advance as we go along, so thank you in advance. So I'd like to cover basically what the sector looks like, the risk posed by cybersecurity threats, get a little bit into what EPA and others' efforts are underway to mitigate this risk. Perhaps mention that some of the cyber incidents affecting the water sector and lessons learned, though Michael just covered those, so I may gloss over that part. And finally, some of the challenges associated with the cybersecurity issue in the water sector. Slide 2, please. So the water and wastewater system sector is, I think, as folks know, is one of 16 designated, critical infrastructure sectors with operations considered vital to the United States and its communities. As Michael, I think, mentioned, the water sector includes about 150,000 drinking water systems and another 16,000 wastewater utilities across the U.S. and its territories. Now, in discussing cybersecurity with our stakeholders, with the water associations and owners and operators, we divvy the sector up into kind of 3 basic categories. And these are, I think, important for understanding maybe some of the challenges, skipping to the last topic, associated with cybersecurity. A small minority of systems can be considered, I think, high capacity systems, that is utilities with high existing capacity to address cybersecurity measures. They're well equipped to implement cybersecurity using just existing guidance and tools and resources. These capacities are not necessarily size dependent, but as you can imagine, the larger utilities tend to have larger resources. So I think there is somewhat of a correlation there. Then there are utilities that have a limited capacity, and they have a limited kind of existing capacity. They're in the early stages, if at all, of adopting cybersecurity measures, and just typically lack the supporting resources needed to undertake, implementation of cybersecurity. And in the thoughts of the work group that we had formed, which again consisted of water associations and owners operators, limited capacity systems represent a majority of systems throughout the US. And then finally, there are very limited internal capacity systems. They basically may never be able to implement cybersecurity protections without direct hands-on technical assistance, the type of assistance some of you may be familiar with, maybe through circuit riders, whether you're in our National Rural Water Association or RCAP or the states or what have you. So those are 3 broad categories of utilities. Now, as I think as Michael alluded to, and as is the premise of this whole discussion, cybersecurity really represents a substantial threat for the water sector, given the relative ease of access to critical, water treatment systems and distribution systems from the internet and other open sources. And of course, water and wastewater facilities use automated process controls and electronic networks to monitor and operate virtually all aspects, right, of their operating systems, of your operating systems, including, intakes, wells, effluent collection, water and sewage treatment, et cetera, et cetera. And these processes could all be vulnerable to cyber attacks, which could disable or manipulate monitoring and control systems. And it's important to understand that there's both the IT side and the OT side, and we'll get into a little bit of that later on. So the majority of attacks that we see on the sector involve ransomware, which is highly disruptive, can be highly disruptive to utility, business, and communication processes, but usually do not interrupt water service itself. These attacks are commonly executed through various, phishing and social engineering schemes. The failure by either the utilities or third-party providers to install software patches and updates, weak user authentication, and just other fundamental cybersecurity weaknesses. The good news is that basic cyber best practices, along with a robust cyber incident response plan, could prevent many of these attacks and certainly mitigate the consequences should one occur. And Michael mentioned some of those basic at least some of the products that Water ICEAC and others have to address those basic practices. So spear phishing and so forth, and ransomware tend to focus on the IT side. However, we know that Russia and other actors have targeted U.S. critical infrastructure, including the water sector, for the OT side. And incidents, both domestic and abroad, indicate, I think, the real potential for cyber attacks to disrupt, the operations of water and wastewater systems. And recent incidents, and Michael mentioned Oldsmar, and also the incident in Kansas underscore the potential for OT attacks. And the Colonial Pipeline, which here in the Southeast is a huge deal, at least initially indicates maybe how an attack on the IT side can affect the OT side of operations. So we shouldn't necessarily consider those discrete entities. So next slide, please. Just real briefly for slide 3. So under something called Presidential Policy Directive 21, and now the National Defense Authorization Act, EPA fulfills a critical mission in water sector cybersecurity by helping water and wastewater systems prepare, identify, respond, and recover from cyber attacks. And we carry out this mission in partnership with our colleagues over at DHS, in particular CISA, also the Water Sector Coordinating Council, which is the main forum we have for interacting with stakeholders, as well as federal, state, and tribal partners as well. So we work with the water sector in a voluntary partnership model to promote the adoption of cybersecurity best practices, which, as I said, can be effective in preventing and responding to cyber attacks. So EPA, along with other water associations, including Water ICEAC, AWWA, WEF, et cetera, have developed kind of best cybersecurity practices which can assist water systems really of all sizes and capabilities. I mentioned those 3 different types of capacity systems. So also, as I think many of you know, under America's Water Infrastructure Act, community water systems serving more than 3,300 people must conduct risk and resilience assessments and develop or update their emergency response plans. And these assessments and plans must address essentially cyber security. So that is one requirement on the water sector, although it is a pretty, it doesn't specify that utilities need to adopt specific cybersecurity practices, just that they consider them in developing an assessment and emergency response plan. So EPA also provides nationwide training, now mostly virtual. We used to do it in person, to the water sector on cybersecurity threats, vulnerabilities, consequences, response, And we've provided training to about 3,500 water and wastewater utilities nationwide since about 2014. We also developed targeted guidance and tools and materials, such as guidance to the states, something called incident action plans, which is essentially a distilled version of what you should do if planning and responding and recovering from a cyber attack, also tabletop exercise tools and risk assessment tools, all of which address cybersecurity. One initiative which I'll briefly mention is really the prevalence of cyber attacks, and their success, at least to me, demonstrates the importance of supplementing the current approach to cybersecurity, which is kind of premised on broadcast messaging, through fact sheets or even training. And we think that to improve cybersecurity in the water sector, technical assistance providers must engage directly with individual water utilities, mostly kind of on the smaller side, to assess their current practices and guide them on how to reduce cyber vulnerabilities and how to respond to a cyber attack. So EPA has initiated an effort in about, I believe, 8 states, with the ultimate objective of covering all 50 states to provide such direct on-site technical assistance. As I mentioned before, there's those 3 categories of systems. Those with very limited capacity will benefit directly from such a hands-on approach. In fact, we have a hard time thinking that they would improve their cybersecurity without such assistance. There's also some funding available for cybersecurity assessments and other countermeasures from the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, with which you may be familiar, and something called WIFIA, which is the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. So there is some funding available. Next slide, please. So CISA and many of the associations
David, it looks like you're muted. We're not getting your audio right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, thank you. My phone just cut out. I don't know why. Okay, I will continue in this mode. Please let me know if my audio goes funky as well. I will stop the video just so I don't take up any more bandwidth than I need to. So I see you're on slide 4. So hopefully that that means you heard everything I said about slide 3. So CISA and a lot of the other associations offer an array of technical assistance and other programs, and I suspect my co-panelists will cover these items, so I don't need to go into that now. Let me pause for a second and talk about like the actual response structure, like what happens if there is a cyber attack. I just think it would be helpful for the sake of context to provide some background on this. Folks are generally unaware. So something called Presidential Policy Directive 41 identifies 3 general kind of concurrent lines of effort in responding to a cyber incident. So under the structure, DHS, in particular CISA, has the lead federal role for asset response, meaning that they provide technical assistance to affected entities to protect assets, mitigate vulnerabilities, and reduce impacts. So this DHS program, both resource and really expert-wise, is where the technical capacity exists for assisting critical owners and operators during an incident. So secondly, the other concurrent line of effort is really with DOJ, FBI in particular. They have the lead for what's called threat response. So law enforcement and forensics activity. And thirdly, the Office of Director of National Intelligence has the lead on intelligence, as you'd expect, responsible for situational threat awareness and assessing adversaries' capabilities. So these are 3 concurrent lines of effort with, again, CISA, FBI, and ODNI having the role. EPA's role is really to help the federal government understand the business or operational impacts of a cyber incident in the water sector, and also to help with steady state preparedness to ensure that utilities are prepared to respond. Next slide, please. Great. So I think I will skip, in the interest of time, skip over some of the incidents. We've talked about, Michael has talked about some of this before. The only thing I will say about Oldsmar is, so we still don't know some critical information, although it is used frequently. You see it cited in the media. We don't know, for example, the perpetrators, which is an important gap in our understanding of the incident, but Oldsmar really may be the biggest policy driver in several respects. So clearly the prospect that drinking water could be contaminated by our cyber attack has grabbed public attention in a way that hundreds of previous ransomware attacks did not. And combined with the relatively, let's say, undeveloped maybe state of cybersecurity at Oldsmar, the incident really has led to kind of reconsideration within the federal government of how to better promote cybersecurity in the water sector. And taken with the SolarWinds incident, which shows that networks can be penetrated even if the user does everything right because it was a supply chain hack. And along with the Microsoft Exchange incident, these attacks, at least to me, support moving to what I call, and probably other names for it, kind of the National Security Agency's kind of zero trust model, which is premised on assuming that the breach is inevitable or may have already occurred, and networks and operating systems are designed and managed accordingly. So, for example, in the case of water sector control systems, you assume that a threat actor has or will penetrate your control system. So what does that mean for how you design it and control access? And countermeasures like cyber physical controls and not allowing remote connections to change system settings, are examples of designing a system with zero trust. So that's one of the take-home messages, at least for me. Next slide, please. I'll actually pass over this one just in the interest of time, and I'll skip over this slide as well, other than to note that included among the 18,000 customers were a number of customers in the water sector. So the SolarWinds compromise, we know, did affect entities within the water sector. So next slide, please. And this is my final slide. So let me what should water systems do? Of course, I think that's kind of self-evident in terms of implement best practices and prepare for a cyber attack. Some of the challenges associated with this is cybersecurity is not regulated. Water and wastewater systems, therefore, are not required to adopt cybersecurity practices, and also are not required to report really their cybersecurity status. Most water and wastewater systems have pretty limited resources and can vary highly on their technical capability for cybersecurity. So that is a great challenge when trying to improve cybersecurity in the sector. And of course, resources and personnel at water and wastewater systems are prioritized to fulfill their public health mission, which is to provide clean and safe water that meets regulations. So that is generally where the bulk of the resources go. Water and wastewater systems also generally do not report cybersecurity incidents for a variety of reasons. So we don't have a good sense of the prevalence of cybersecurity attacks across the country. And as I mentioned, as I led off with, the large number of water, 150-some thousand, and wastewater, another 16,000 systems, creates challenges with providing, individual assessments to enhance cybersecurity. So these are all the challenges that our program needs to overcome in order to meet our own, meet the agency's Homeland Security responsibilities for enhancing cybersecurity in the water sector. So with that, Elkin, I will hand it over back to you and the next panelist.
All right. Well, thank you for the presentation, David. Well, one of the things we're trying to do during this session is to promote the discussion across different sectors. So far, we have gone over two water-related representatives with the Water ICEAC and EPA, are one that provides awareness and one that provides direct support to the water utilities. Certainly, our a set of utilities that have similarities with the water sector are the power utilities. So our next panelist will help us understand some learn lessons from the power sector and how they can they apply to the water sector. Many of you might be aware that the power sector was regulated way below the question was out there for the water sector. They have to comply and they have a very strict regulations, and I'm pretty sure that that's going to be a learning ground for us on the water side. So our next panelist is Mr. Jim McCarty. He's a senior security engineer at the National Institutes of Standards and Technologies National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. He currently serves as the lead for the energy sector. Where his focuses are on security data analytics, security architecture for power delivery systems, IT, OT asset management, and situational awareness for the electrical sector. Prior to joining the National Center for Cybersecurity and of Excellence, Mr. McCarty worked in various cybersecurity roles in the U.S. With the U.S. at the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the U.S. Department of Transportation, where he managed cybersecurity incident response teams and conducted security assessments on components of the nation's critical infrastructure system. So with that said, Jim, welcome, and we're now here to listen from you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Elkin, and thank you for to everyone here on this forum today to allow me the opportunity to present what we do here at the NIST National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. Elkin, if you don't mind, I'm assuming my sound works. Can you see the slides up there? I just want to make sure.
Yes, sir. The sound and the slides are showing well.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. It's going to be important for folks to realize a couple of things first about our business model here. We are NIST, we are part of the Department of Commerce, and in particular, my organization is the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, or NCCOE, as I will continue to call it throughout this presentation. And we were started about 7 or 8 years ago as a result of two previous administrations. I will in fact say Executive Order 16306 basically led to, or was an executive order oriented towards critical infrastructure cybersecurity protection. And two things, NIST and a lot of other federal agencies had taskings along those lines. One of the things that NIST created was the Cybersecurity Framework as a result of that, as in response to that executive order for critical infrastructure, and the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is what I am a part of now. The best approach that they thought would be viable for concentrating on the critical infrastructure sectors was to basically parse up what NCCOE does in these particular sectors. That me being part of the energy sector, there's manufacturing, there's transportation, there's finance. But what are we actually producing for the public at large? And it's basically a solution-driven collaborative hub addressing complex cybersecurity problems. I want to make sure I emphasize that these are not one-off challenges, as the two previous presenters demonstrated quite effectively. Some of these rise above the level of just installing antivirus or monitoring and detection capabilities. It really is addressing on a use case basis, working with a particular sector to address their most complex cybersecurity challenges. In that we ask them, we don't tell them what their challenges are, we ask them, and then we go and produce guidance. And I'll tell you more about that in just a couple of minutes here in terms of the guidance we produce as an outcome of our engagement with each individual sector. Again, in my case, it's energy, but I suspect, and what I've seen here over the past couple of presentations, is that there's a tremendous amount of overlap, at least at the device level, between energy and water, in addition to the dependence that water has on energy. So how we are broken down within NIST, and this will help provide a little bit more of context. Again, Department of Commerce, NIST is part of the Department of Commerce. We're part of the Information Technology Laboratory. So NIST is divided into individual laboratories, ITL, or Information Technology is what I'm a part of. And then specifically, the NCCOE is chartered under the Applied Cybersecurity Division. And there's a good reason why. For folks who are familiar with how NIST operates, you may think of us as a standards organization, or at least a supplemental standards organization. You may think of the folks at NIST as doing a lot of forward-looking research, and you'd all be correct. But in terms of how we're trying to frame helping the public, or I should say these individual sectors, with addressing cybersecurity challenges, the Applied Cybersecurity Division, or ACD, is chartered specifically to do that. Let's take the challenges that are prevalent now and address them in real time. And how we do that is basically producing guidance, soliciting collaboration on these individual projects, which again are driven by industry in order to produce solutions for the public. There's a couple of clarifications I want to make, and these are very important. First and foremost, we don't have any regulatory or statutory authority in the work that we're doing. So we're not regulating. In fact, we're not looking to supplant any regulations that are out there. For folks familiar with the energy sector, you may know about NERC, that they are basically the compliance standard from which all utilities in certain cases, at least in terms of generation and transmission or bulk electrical, must comply with. And there's a lot of cybersecurity offerings that they have to offer too. So you can consider this supplemental but highly relevant guidance, purely focused on cybersecurity. Our goals are rather simple: improve cybersecurity for business and commerce. In my case, again, in energy, lower the learning curve for cybersecurity. A lot of our documentation tries to address these complex problems, not necessarily technically complex, although they can be, but in terms of applying some of the more common frameworks and things that are out there, like the cybersecurity framework, to help people not only understand the problem that they're trying to solve, but also approaches to their overall cybersecurity programs. And every now and again, as a result of performing these projects, or builds as we call them, we are physically building solutions in labs and extended infrastructure. Innovation does get sparked once in a while, where one of our collaborators, and by the way, our collaborators come directly from industry, namely tech collaborators. Every once in a while, these collaborators will determine I can enhance my capability by adding this component or this feature, and that will sometimes come as a result of this natural grassroots level engagement. I want to turn attention now to the actual projects that we're working on, and this one in particular. If this sounds like foreign language to you, just bear with me, because remember, based on the overlap in terms of the operational technology, industrial control devices and things like that, you can take what I'm doing here in energy, and I would say readily apply it to use cases in the water sector, at least from what I've observed here on today's forum. With that being said, the current project that we're working on is securing the industrial Internet of Things, IIoT, let's say, in the sense that, the enabling technology is the open internet. It's a great thing to have. I'm not saying it's an unsecured internet, but it is an open one. And what does that enable? What do we have going on out in the sector right now that poses concern, perhaps to the operating utilities, or the electric utilities that are already out there, is being able to trust the data. Now what we're seeing is the proliferation of distributed energy resources like solar panels and things like that now can generate and add power to the grid, whereas before it was usually a one-way unidirectional distribution of power. Now that's changing, and the Industrial Internet of Things, or IIoT, is what's enabling that change to take place. There are many benefits. There are also cybersecurity challenges that are commensurate with this little bit of a change in environment. Remember that the capabilities and technologies I'm presenting here are not specific to just this one use case. They can be applied to many different areas of cybersecurity, but I just wanted to give everybody the background. We have a preliminary draft document out there. You'll see on the right-hand side. That's just a preliminary draft. We haven't not completed the build, but it's free and available for comment. to anyone who wishes to comment on it. The project focuses chiefly on demonstrating data integrity, malware prevention, detection, and mitigation for scenarios in which information exchanges occur between DERs, distributed energy resources, and the distribution grid. So let's take out that last part and let's focus on data integrity, malware prevention, and detection, namely data integrity. What is the key concern? Am I able to, or are utilities able to trust the back and forth data flow now that has become basically prevalent in some of these grids, perhaps more in areas where there's, or more rural areas, namely in the West? What am I receiving from this person who's providing, or this independent operator who's providing me power? What am I able to send back, and how can I validate that that data itself hasn't been spoofed, changed, or disrupted in any meaningful way? How can I trust the data that I'm making these business and operational decisions based on? So that's the cybersecurity component of what we're trying to attempt here, or what we are attempting, and so far have been successful in doing so. Is it's basically all about the trust relationship between, you could call it devices, entities, whatever it may be, but you have to be able to trust the data. That's the long and short of it. What's unique about where we are right now, and I would venture to say that perhaps the same may be true in the water sector, is that a lot of these edge devices now are not just dummy devices anymore. These things can compute, store, actuate, sense. Here we talk about the interplay, the natural interplay between cyber and physical, right? Digital commands being issued to something that can actuate or sense or change temperatures or pressures or valve settings and things like that. So this is a key concern. We are certainly focused on the operational technology element of it, and now even more so because a lot of these edge devices, whereas before didn't have this type of inboard or onboard capability, they now in fact do. And what the concern there is they can make decisions on their own based on how they're configured. We want them to be configured properly. So that brings us to the capabilities that we're showcasing. So when I talk about analytical and visualization capabilities, I think it's safe to say that most people are familiar with that. That's nothing new, but really the goal there is to be able to showcase different views of the same data. In this case, we're particularly focused on the cybersecurity component, right? Network monitoring, as has been alluded to in previous presentations, this is an important component, but certainly by no means will wholly prevent anybody being attacked. Malware detection, signature-based in this particular case, or behavioral-based. This is another key component, right? These are all supplemental capabilities that can be brought to bear to affect data integrity or the detection and mitigation, I should say detection and prevention of malware attacks. Trusted authentication and access control. It is important to note we're not just talking about authorized users here. We are literally using the devices that are being brought into this environment and assigning unique identifiers to them. What does this do? You attack the authentication and access control problem from two angles, right? Not just the personnel angle where we can keep a record of who accessed the system at what time, et cetera, but you're also assigning unique identities to the devices in your environment. Whereas if they were to receive communications from a device that isn't trusted, that is not part of the network, they would essentially stop communicating, which would do what? In effect, prevent any bad data or malware from becoming prevalent in the operating environment or the system. Communications and data integrity. In this particular case, this is another way to communicate on a public LTE or a private LTE network between two endpoints, which actually increases the availability of communications, enabling, for all intents and purposes, more proliferation of distributed energy resources. And then finally, lower right-hand corner, immutable audit trails, ledger-based technology that will track or attest to the veracity of the data that's being communicated between entities. Again, think of entities in terms of the electric utilities as an independent operator and a mainstream utility. In this case, though, it can be the devices between the two. So we're essentially talking about the same thing, but that immutable audit trail is a key component of our project. And I'll drill a little further into that because it can record all the communications and transactions that occurred between these entities. And what happens if something does go awry or afoul in this process, right? They can always refer, as long as these entities agree that this will be their basis of trust, then they can always refer to this immutable audit trail as their key for the information where, okay, regardless of what other data components are out there for us to look and drill into, whether it's in the individual device or at a third party, for example. Third party exchanges are rather common. In my particular sector, we can refer to this immutable audit trail and at least agree on the fact that, yes, this transaction was performed. These things did occur. What do we do from here in terms of mitigating the issue or the concern? Now, this sounds like it's a lot after effect, but it does do a lot in prevention because the ledger itself serves as it's being, you take all of the devices that are involved in this infrastructure to make it run, which is essentially to produce power and provide power to the public. And these devices will basically self-identify to this ledger in order to make sure that there was nothing, I would say, nothing that shouldn't be in there going into this ledger, and it always provides that level of attestation. So that's just one of many components that we can introduce here to cybersecurity overall. I want to just shift focus real quick to, there we go, just our project partners. Again, just keep in mind that we don't get to choose the people we work with. What we do, the way we engage on our projects is basically via the Federal Register, which gives any or any company out there that has a commercially available product the ability to engage with us. And how we do it, we vet a project description. We basically solicit collaboration over the Federal Register, and we put in the requirements for our cybersecurity, what we want to do with our project, and these people respond in kind, and we select the capabilities, or I should say the products, based on a first come, first served basis. So again, nobody pays us to become a part of our lab builds, and we certainly do not pay anybody. What this does in effect, the end result is, again, what you see here. These are some, these are previous documents that we have published in the sector, which I truly believe can benefit the sector here. Identity and access management for electric utilities, situational awareness for electric utilities, energy sector asset management. So again, we're only about 7 or 8 years old. These were the first foundational offerings that we had to give, because you have to start from somewhere. The new project, the one that I just described to everybody, was probably a step up in terms of level of complexity, in terms of focusing on a specific use case. But these documents can provide a lot of general detail to people in terms of securing their overall operating environments, and they're definitely focused towards the energy sector in particular. Now, with that, just one of the key characteristics, or one of the key things that I would like folks to walk away with today knowing, is when you see the SP, the special publication designation, specifically the 1800, I should say 1800 designation, that is a designation given specifically to the National Cybersecurity of Excellence. And that's one of the key reasons why is because in contrast to other NIST documents or NIST special publications, we are actually performing a build. So one of these documents will typically have a Part A, which is a description of an overall overview of the problem, a Part B, which details the architecture, the rationale for our solution, and things of that nature, and then the Part C, which is a literal how-to guide to configure, integrate all of the components that we used in the build. And I'll go back to the last slide really quickly here. These components do require some level of integration in terms of being able to produce the overall desired outcome, which is a solution for whatever particular use case we're working on. So these guidance or these documents contain those components, and that's why you see a new designation for these particular this particular suite of documentation coming out of the NCCOE in the SP 1800 series. With that, there's our website. You can certainly learn more about everything that we're doing or get into finer level of granularity on the guidance itself that we produce by visiting that website. And then finally, the one main thing I can say is that all of the work we do is driven by and oriented towards user groups, communities of interest, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, feel free to communicate with me directly or join one of the community of interests at the NCCOE. Everything is free and available to the public. All of our documentation is, and we encourage engagement from multiple sectors all of the time, because that's basically inherent in our business model. And with that, Elkin, I think I'm just about done. And were there any questions specific to me? I didn't look at chat while I was doing this, but.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim. I think we have received a few questions. I was planning to lead them to the to bring it up at the end of the next presentation.
Okay, great.
So can also be used as an open discussion. So I want to, related to our next panelist, I want to mention the following. The Cyberspace Solarium Commission was established in the John S. McCain National Defense Authorization Act of 2019 to develop a consensus on a strategic approach to defending the United States in cyberspace against the cyber attacks of significant consequences. Our next panelist, retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, serves as the Executive Director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. He most recently served as the Policy Director for the Senate Armed Services Committee under the leadership of Senator John McCain. Mark served for 32 years in the U.S. Navy as a nuclear-trained surface warfare officer, retiring as a Rear Admiral in 2017. His flag officer assignments included Director of Operations at the U.S. Pacific Command. With that said, welcome, Mark.
Hey, thank you very much, Elkin. It's great to be here with Michael and David and James, and it's been great to listen to them. I think three of really the best people we could hear on this issue. I'm not going to use slides. That's a product of my working for Senator McCain. He liked it all verbal, so I'm happy to sit here and give you a quick brief. I do want to do a tiny bit on the background of the commission before I lead in, so you see where we're coming from, because we have a slightly different aspect than the associations or U.S. government agencies that we've heard. The commission was set up in 2019. Real quick, our mission was very specifically to make recommendations on what's the best strategic approach to protect our national critical infrastructure, to include our democratic institutions, from cyber attacks of significant consequence. And then Senator McCain was very specific that he wanted legislative and policy remedies laid out in detail. This came from his general dislike of commissions. It was kind of an admission that the legislature or the executive branch was not tackling an issue succinctly or effectively, and that was his assessment of cybersecurity. He took a look from about 2000 to the time 2018 and said a lot of things have gone wrong here, whether it's the intellectual property theft from China, the Russian cyber-enabled IO against our election system in 2016, or the North Korean attacks on Sony. He saw Iranian attacks on our banks in the 2013-14 timeframe. He saw this constant level of effort by our adversaries to get at our infrastructures, with almost no response by the United States. And so he said to the commission, go out and work on it. We did. The most important thing he did is he put 4 legislators on the commission. What that means is if we have an idea and we can convince, and the 4 legislators believe it, and they can convince their partners in the House and Senate, we can get things turned into law, which is hard. Just as a data point, I think about 97% of bills that are filed do not become law. So when you see a bill and you go, great, they're tackling it, there's a 3% chance you should remain happy. So we went out and started to work it. The basic conclusion of our 2020 report was that 3 things needed to happen. One, we absolutely needed to start to protect our critical infrastructure. I think water, wastewater falls right in this, where there was a large perception by the 85%, the private sector or municipalities own and operate 85% of our critical infrastructure. And the vast majority did not see a cyber threat. Look, the banking saw it. They've been under criminal attack. And if you go to a banking ops, cybersecurity ops center, it's like being in a 3 or 4 star ops center, a military ops center. It is high end. And I can't guarantee it's doing everything right. I can guarantee it costs a lot of money. But most of them are doing the right thing. I think energy had experienced it at the production side. I think because of regulation around the nuclear power plants and some other things, and some thinking about the Soviet Union's maybe potentially physical security attacks on our plants, we have a strong commitment to security and cybersecurity in our energy production. I wouldn't say that applied to distribution. And I think you saw some of it in the telecom systems. They'd worked closely with our intelligence agencies to see what the adversaries were doing, and they had made significant efforts on cybersecurity. A lot of the other infrastructures did not feel that kind of pressure. And we'll talk about ransomware. I'll talk about it near the end, but that does change things. So we put out our report. We had 82 recommendations. 50 of them were legislative, and we got half of them done, so we got 27 laws passed within the National Defense Authorization Act. That's a lot. And because we were effective, we're extended for a second year. And in looking at it, and we were effective because of the 4 congressional members. There wasn't any other, there's not a secret sauce. You have congressional members, you can get a lot done. What came in next was they said, hey, you can do another year, but take a look at some specific issues. And one of the issues we decided to take a look at was security of a couple of the lifeline infrastructures that weren't up at the same level, say financial services or energy production or telecommunications. And those included the cloud, water and wastewater, and pipeline. So that was timely. So we're taking deep dives into each of those. And so I'm going to talk a little bit here about the water. We will have the opportunity, the commission, to write some legislation. That doesn't mean it'll get passed, but as opposed to 3%, like I said, the normal bills, we were at about 50% last year. Our Senator King likes to say that if he were a professional baseball player, he'd be signing like a 10-year, $340 million contract because he hit about 480. It's probably, it's humorous, but slightly true. So we're out there working this thing and want to work on legislation. We think there's good work going on at EP. There's good thoughts about what to do going forward at the U.S. agencies. We think that there's good work at a lot of the water associations thinking about this, but we've got to translate that into kind of legislative action. And if you don't do legislation, it's very hard. I get very worried about rule by executive order. We're about to have a really good executive order come out today on cybersecurity from the White House, and I fully support it. But I also tell you, many of the elements are a lesser level of guidance because it's an executive order and not legislation. Legislation does well in front of judges. Executive orders do poorly in front of judges. That's a general general thought. But if I'm an industry or a company, I tend to follow the law. I try to follow the law. Executive orders are something you have to make a risk management decision based on. So I'm excited about getting some law changes in and working with the administration to convert some of their executive orders into law, or to go where their executive orders could not go in law. So that's the background. And look, I'm repeating slightly what we heard earlier today, but recent events in the US have pointed towards the growing awareness of the cyber vulnerabilities in our water, wastewater systems. Oldsmar has been mentioned. I think I heard someone mention the Post-Rick Water District in Kansas, a case that we really didn't know about that I actually think happened before Oldsmar. But I think this is challenging. I think both industry, which is composed of largely small local municipalities in this and small private companies, and the U.S. government represented by EPA are really, they're challenged to keep up with the increasing risk that's being driven by the automation of water production and distribution and wastewater recovery and processing systems. And look, there's a good reason for that automation. I appreciate my current water rates. And I appreciate my low level of local taxes. Obviously, I don't live in New York or New Jersey. And as a result, I and I have voted consistently to not really fund much. So, I mean, I understand why municipalities are trapped in this regard. I understand, the EPA has a lot of #1 priorities that are not security and cybersecurity. I have to be frank. I just reread the EPA administrator's initial confirmation hearing. He managed to not mention cybersecurity. That was pre-Oldsmar. Kind of give him a pass. But then last month he did a discussion in front of House Appropriations, where again, his opening statement, this is after Oldsmar, doesn't mention cybersecurity. And I'm sorry, that means it's not it mentioned a lot of things, a lot of really important things, a lot about lead, a lot about climate change, a lot of important Biden administration priorities. He didn't mention cybersecurity. So as far as I'm concerned, and I think a lot of senators and congressmen, we know what his priority on cybersecurity is, which is it's not a priority. And that's not fair to everyone in EPA. But at the very top, when that's the message, and that's the message to Congress, that was a statement to Congress that's received. So a significant effort is required on both sides of that public-private partnership. The municipalities, the owners and operators, some are private sector, and the federal government. We got to work together to reduce the vulnerability. I think the effort needs to increase, and this is just right along with Dave Travers and Michael Arsenault were saying. We got to improve the basic cyber hygiene. We have to improve the operator training. We have to raise the threat awareness, and probably most expensively, and this gets a little bit of what James McCarthy is saying, we need to figure out how you modernize some insecure systems. So the commission is studying a number of possible legislative solutions, and these include incentivizing cybersecurity investments with grants and low-income loans. And I'm telling you right now, I did not coordinate this with Michael Arsenault, but I think I'm in a reverse order reading his list. Increase access to cyber threat information. I think this really applies to the large municipalities who might be in a position to take in situ or in the middle of a crisis action. But everyone needs to get better cyber threat information, and it needs to be unclassified so they can be rapidly processed. Improve cyber hygiene training and exercise programs, and working with equipment manufacturers to build more cybersecurity into the as-delivered machinery. Look, the way I look at it, the access to tools for the adversary has been increasing exponentially now for a decade. The interconnectivity of our systems and the automation that it drives has been increasing exponentially. So that's two risk drivers increasing exponentially. The investment in cybersecurity has been linear, and at best on a very, very slight upslope. Well, when your risk drivers are exponential and your risk mitigators are linear, you're in for a lot of trouble. We have got to improve the response to the federal government and the owners and operators of our water authorities to kind of to close that gap in risk and secure this critical lifeline infrastructure. I don't need to tell you all that it's not just human security or the human lifeline security, but it's also about economic security, and it's about national security. These systems are required. I want to talk really quickly about the Colonial event and ransomware. I'll say on the Colonial event, there's a bit of a mismatch between words and deeds here on all sides. I think Colonial has done the absolute minimum of informing the government. They told the FBI they've done. You saw the CISA director yesterday, Brandon Wales, acting CISA director, make very clear that Colonial has not talked to CISA. There's insufficient public-private collaboration in that area. I think there's a story out today that TSA's cybersecurity team, or I think it's their security team for pipelines, is 6 people. I think their cybersecurity team's 2 or 3. They had almost no cybersecurity guidance out. I was a little surprised about that. There's a long-term fight, and I made in 1998, I worked at the NSC when we wrote PPD 63 and wrote the NIAP, the National Infrastructure Assurance Plan, and assigned sector specific agencies for the first time. And there was a fight over pipeline between energy and transportation. And we ended up coming down. Norman Netto, I think was Secretary of Transportation, was very aggressive, and we came down on transportation. And it had maritime transportation system, pipelines, roads, rail, air. It made sense. It seemed to make sense. In hindsight, probably a mistake. It transferred from Department of Transportation when TSA was put over was created over DHS. The pipelines came with it. Probably, there's an organizational problem there. and we'll have to work on that. But there's insufficient public-private collaboration. And the other part that's not good is the Biden administration rolled out an infrastructure plan, almost $3 trillion. We'll say it's about $1 trillion or $800 billion, and what we've traditionally known as infrastructure, the stuff where you would want cybersecurity. I'm not sure we need cybersecurity on the health, on the child care initiatives and things like that, but on the traditional bridges, roads, pipelines, water systems, cyber, where we want cybersecurity, about 900 billion. If you look through the initial offering, there is little to no mention of cybersecurity. That absolutely has to change. In the initial skinny budget that came out, CISA, the kind of heartbeat of cybersecurity inside the federal government, and for working with the private sector, and obviously they have to support the sector-specific agencies who have roles. The budget increase was 5%, which sounds good till you realize the whole rest of the non-DoD federal budget increased 60%. So we're told that cybersecurity is a priority, but it grows at 1/3 the rate of the others. So in Congress, the commission's recommended a 20% increase, which is prioritizing cybersecurity, which the administration was not doing. So a little bit of a mismatch between the words you hear for the White House that we're doing everything we can, we've thought about this, we're committed to this, cybersecurity is a priority, and deeds. And the number one deed in government is resources. Resources is money, and the money has not been there. Now, things can change. The budget is not done. The White House could alter it. I think that's unlikely. Congress could alter it. I think that's likely. The infrastructure plan is going to be altered. It's being altered, and hopefully cybersecurity is written in a more meaningful way. Senator Sass, one of our commissioners, made a very strong statement about that the other day. The other thing is we need to do a better job broadly in the Congress in passing some laws for systemically important critical infrastructure. A lot of water is systemically, the larger. So this probably applies more to the greater than 100,000 systems are going to qualify as critical functions. Also, some of those smaller ones, but they're located in critical national security areas, could be critical functions near military bases, near our significant ports, or near significant propulsion plants that service important national security requirements. And when they're identified as critical functions, we need to establish a better working relationship with them. Create benefits and burdens that say you have to have better security if you're going to be because you're a critical function. Colonial Pipeline would have been a critical function. Almost all the natural gas pipelines as well. All the natural gas pipelines would be critical functions as well. There's going to be some burdens on you about security, about reporting incidents, and there'll be some benefits where we'll provide better intel support, tailored intelligence, and potentially liability protection. We've got to come around on that and get that right. And so we have some other recommendations there, but I'll leave it at that. We have to get the appropriations right, and we have to get the public-private collaboration infrastructure right and the laws right. Finally, and I think Senate 914, I'll say one last thing. We got to look at that. It was a little light on the cybersecurity. I think there was maybe 110 million in there total when you added it up versus 100 billion plans. I think probably cybersecurity deserves a little more than a percentage point of a percentage, 0.1%, but we have to work on that. I do want to talk about one thing, ransomware. I think you're going to see changes in this. I can't imagine, as people see what is going on, that it's going to play out the way it has so far. As most of you know, current FBI policy is to discourage payment, but it's not outlawed. They just discourage it. I don't think they have a solution besides that, but they would discourage you paying it. I would imagine the current White House position is a little more muddled than that, because while the FBI may not want you to pay it, all the rest of us, the Secretary of Treasury sure would like, and the Secretary of Energy would like those pipelines functioning perfectly enough. Payment is what released your billing system, which is probably what's preventing them from opening it. How they meter bill, how they automated bill customers. People are gonna be like, do whatever it takes to get that working. But Treasury also says, don't violate the OFAC list. And you ask, what's that? It's a list of banned entities for which we have sanctions that you cannot, and they're international. They're Iranian, Russian, North Korean for the most part. I think over time, and I would be, if I was in a position to do so, I would be recommending inside the administration that they do an executive order under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, and ransomware would trigger that Emergency Powers Act, and it would ban any payment of ransomware to computer hackers. That would make it illegal to pay any ransomware demands. And I think insurance companies and victims of these hacks would stop doing it. And eventually someone's going to have to stop doing it. And if no one paid to satisfy the hacker demands, eventually the ransomware would stop, at least in the US. And for sure, there's a risk, especially for the first few payers, that the ransomware hackers would for some period shut down additional critical systems, and those systems would be offline. But the Biden administration could also create a public-private response force and resources to assist critical service providers who followed the law and did not pay the ransom, to get them back online as fast as possible. And then President Biden could, under the Intelligence Act, find the attackers who did this and label them a national security threat. That would authorize the intelligence community and the armed forces to engage in campaigns to identify them and disable their systems. Look, that sounds harsh, but I have to tell you, the current system of don't pay, we discourage you paying them, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, get your system online, I don't think is an effective, that doesn't befit, the world's, strongest democracy. And so I think we're long-term going to have to come up with a better ransomware policy. I think I just laid out the most likely path, but it's going to be rough on the first few companies that have to deal with this. And it's as likely that that's a water company, as a pipeline company, as a wastewater company, as a electrical distribution company, particularly in a rural area where they're more vulnerable. So I think I'll leave it at that. The commission is going to work hard on a bunch of these issues. I don't think we'll tackle ransomware specifically. I was just may give you my personal insight on that. But you'll see us work to get the appropriations right, to get the infrastructure plan right, and to pass some legislation to do a better job and better empower CISA and the EPA to work with you. And hopefully, including that'll be grant and low interest loan programs to help with cybersecurity, help with the training and exercises, and help with the tabletop exercises. Elkin, that's what I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the presentation, and I love how we run out all the different aspects that affect the cybersecurity in the water sector. I have so right now we're moving to a more open discussion environment, and I'll try to shape that discussion around some of the questions that we have been receiving. So the first one, and it's an open question. It says, is there a plan to issue certain minimum cybersecurity requirements for water and wastewater facilities? Will that become law? Any thought on that topic from any of the panelists?
I'll start one idea. If you're a critical function, if you are either large enough to be considered a critical function, or you're a medium or small but located in a national security area, I think long-term, when you become systemically important critical infrastructure, you're going to have that. If it's not a regulation, it's a required standard, which is another way of saying regulation. But we would rely heavily on James McCarthy's original institution, NIST, or his current institution, NIST, for those standards. But I think it's inevitable. If you ask me, it's likely it's not going to do well that the Colonial Pipeline one is revealing that we didn't have cybersecurity regulations there. So do I think it's possible? I think it's likely. I'm not saying it's likely across the industry. I don't think I'm in a position to give an opinion.
Yeah, Elkin, this is David. Can you hear me?
Sure. Yes, I do.
Yeah. So as a member of the administration, I probably can't answer that question directly. I would say, however, that I think that we would, if whether Congress passes statutory language that expressly addresses cybersecurity in the water sector, or kind of independent of whatever actions the administration may take, I think any sort of requirement would need to kind of recognize those levels of capability that I mentioned earlier in terms of high capable systems and low capable systems. We talked about the NIST cybersecurity standards. Those are excellent and thorough and I'm greatly impressed by the expertise that's invested in those. But those are completely and utterly inaccessible to the majority of water systems in terms of where they are on cybersecurity and the resources that they have. And so it's important for us, I think, to stress basic cybersecurity practices. Again, going back to the Oldsmar incident, to the Ellsworth incident, which Mark is correct, that actually happened in 2019, predating Oldsmar. We're talking a lack of fundamental basic cybersecurity practices. And I think that's what we would want to address. When you start talking about all the technological solutions, I think you alienate a huge part of the sector. And so you have to focus on the more process-orientated actions that utilities can undertake. Just take a real simple example, the ability to operate on manual, which is my understanding is what the Colonial Pipeline is doing right now for the most part. That's how they have a trickle of supply coming through. Most water utilities need to understand the importance of operating on manual and practice operating on manual. And I understand that water systems with advanced treatment trains, such as featuring RO, may have difficulties with that, and small systems that have small package plants that depend on the internet, again, a challenge. But for the majority of systems, there should be some ability to operate on manual. So those are some of the physical cyber controls that I was mentioning earlier. And so whatever approach the administration eventually takes, and the administration does consider cybersecurity a priority, make absolutely no mistake about that. And I firmly believe that the next few months will underscore the importance assigned to cybersecurity in this administration, really leaving no doubt as to its importance as a top-level priority. Not only for the water sector, but for other sectors as well. So that's just a general comment if you're going to take some sort of formal action, whether statutory or regulatory, you have to make it accessible to the bulk of water systems. Otherwise, it's, I think, a self-defeating process. Over.
It's very appropriate, and I can understand the comment. It's important to underscore the reality is that you have large metropolitan authorities that have utilities that have plenty of resources and the ability to do things at the, if not financial system level, close to it. And then you have the small utilities that are really working with very, very little resources. Anybody who's got into the technical details of the incident in Florida recently, they'll understand that what was lacking was total basic practices. Talking about practices, one of the questions that I got is asking me whether there is an EPA document on best practices, and if not, what would be a good reference?
So there is an EPA document. We don't call it best practices, but we have something called a cybersecurity incident action checklist. And we have if you just Google or search for EPA cybersecurity water, you'll come to our landing page on cybersecurity, and everything that I rushed through at a fairly daunting pace on today's call is listed there. And among that is the cybersecurity incident action checklist, which provides a very succinct list of actions that utilities can take to plan, respond, and recover from cyber attacks. I would, however, underscore that there are also tools available. Michael, I don't know if you want to chime in and talk about the excellent, I think it's the 15 top cybersecurity practices. I actually have printed that out and always have it at my desk because it's a very thorough document. And also shout out our friends at AWWA who have excellent, they have a cybersecurity self-assessment tool that can be useful. So I'd say between those three items, that's a good place to start if you're looking for pretty succinct cybersecurity practices. And you can always delve into, NIST Cybersecurity Framework and other, for example, CISA has a whole toolkit. If you're looking to delve even deeper, you have that capability, that technical capability to delve deeper. But those are the three places I would start. And Michael, I hand it over to you in terms of your best securities document.
Thanks. Yes, the 15 cybersecurity fundamentals, that's something that we've been updating over the last several years. It started out as the 10 basic something, but they're really not basic. They're really fundamental. Anyway, yeah, so, and when we put out alerts, threat alerts, advisories, whatnot, we also include best practices in those advisories, whether they come from EPA, CISA, or FBI recommending practices. But I just wanted to mention that there are some good DHS tools out there. The water sector is vies with the power sector as the #1 and #2 consumer of some of these DHS free tools. I think there's an assessment tool, and then other tools like that. And if you go to Water ICEAC and go to the contact us button and email us, we can guide you toward some of these resources, because there are lots of resources from different sources, and part of our job is to share information, and we want to share it in a way that makes sense. So if anyone is not quite sure where to turn, we can be your gateway to different resources, and we're happy to tell you about those. So just go to our website and hit the contact us button. We'd be happy to help.
Thank you. I would certainly recommend that. I'm personally a subscriber, and as I mentioned before, I receive the information, and usually it's relevant and it's timely. You get it on time. I have a question for Jim, and it's I'm being asking how can somebody engage with the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence to obtain more information about the projects you guys are performing?
Yeah, good question. That's exactly the goal of me coming on presentations such as this. Just go to nccoe.nist.gov and you'll find all the information, most especially about the publications that are published on cybersecurity in various sectors and whatnot. But feel free to reach out to me directly if you're interested in any of what I told you today regarding, industrial control, operational technology, cybersecurity, which is my key focus. In fact, I believe someone already sent an email to wanting to join one of these communities of interest. Feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'll be glad to host a quick intro briefing for anything that I didn't cover today. We have plenty of resources here to ingest and to ingest newcomers and provide them all the information they need to interact with us and be as fully informed as we can possibly make them. Again, open, transparent, and collaborative. That's the key, one of the key underpinnings of our mission here at NCCOE. So nccoe.nist.gov, you can join any one of the communities of interest that are available. There are multiple. There are two that pertain directly to industrial control, which is my energy sector and the manufacturing sector as well. I hope that helps. And Elkin, just if you would, we are planning on passing these slides out because a lot of that information is self-contained in my slides, right? To the group.
We can work on that, yes.
Oh, sure. Okay.
All right. So another question that relates to regulation says, well, we recognize that we're not currently regulated when it comes to cybersecurity, but there's also the acknowledgement that there's some federal requirements. Is there a practical way to connect the two? David?
So yeah, the federal requirements as they relate to cybersecurity come from America's Water Infrastructure Act, which, as I think I mentioned in my presentation, pertains to pretty generic accounting for cybersecurity and conducting risk assessments and emergency response planning. It requires utilities basically to consider, cyber security in both conducting a risk assessment and developing an emergency response plan, kind of period. So those requirements are, like I said, they're not. For those acquainted with EPA's National Primary Drinking Water Regulations, which has much greater specificity in terms of what utilities are, the performance utilities are required to meet in terms of health standards. It's clearly not at that same level, nor is it at the same level of like the performance-based standards, for example, that DHS has for the chemical sector under the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards. So there's nothing equivalent to that. I will say that some states, three leap to mind, I think New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, have state requirements related to cybersecurity in terms of conducting a risk assessment. And I believe at least New Jersey requires utilities to report cyber incidents. So there are some state requirements. So I think, if there were to be any action, of course, you'd want to be cognizant of state requirements and learn from those requirements. But yes, there's in any time you develop a regulation, you don't want to issue a regulation that contradicts or impedes your ability to comply with another regulation. So EPA is always mindful of that. Over.
All right, thank you. So going through the Solarium Commission report, I noticed that there's a mention about the need to reshape the cyber ecosystem. What are the key elements for this to happen?
It's the whole report goes together. So I think the reshaping the cyber ecosystem was alongside rebuilding, building resilience into our infrastructure and building better public-private collaboration. So it's kind of three elements that went together. And so the resilience part is about, how do we respond better, recover from issues? The public-private collaboration was how do we work better ahead of time to reduce or mitigate the opportunity. The cyber ecosystem was about improving improving the inherent cybersecurity defenses in our system. So some of the ideas were, we should have a Bureau of Cyber Statistics where we're better able to gather information and have an understanding. This would have a couple events. First, it would inform our defenders about what's out there, what kind of malicious activity. But second, it would be useful to the cyber insurance market so that they could do actuarial work and have a better understanding of what the threat environment is. Another one was certification and labeling authority. In other words, on products, both for businesses and for personal use, but mostly for businesses, they would be certified. I don't think we could ever get to like an underwater laboratories because unlike electricity, the adversary is a little dynamic. Obviously, I wouldn't want to get shocked by electricity. I'm sure it's dynamic in that regard. But the idea is that you would have certifications that are continually updated to say this product is a gold star product. I use that. It doesn't have to be that term. Kind of like you have a green energy product or an underwriter laboratories product. In other words, elements that try to improve the overall level. One other one is Sarbanes-Oxley reform, where large publicly traded companies have to certify that the CEO was briefed on the status of cybersecurity efforts, what the risks were, what the mitigation plan was, much as we now require them to do about their financial accountability, after 2008. Actually, this was after 2000 when Sarbanes-Oxley was initially passed. So there's a number of issues like that about how do you raise the overall security of the ecosystem. There's a lot of other smaller ones in there about the increased use of DMARC, the increased use of DNS registration, DNSSEC, a lot of the kind of blocking and tackling of foundational internet protocols. But the big ones were the ones I mentioned.
Thank you. So trying to switch a bit the topic more into a technical discussion. So there's there's this practical dilemma that many utilities are faced with the idea of compromising between safety and accessibility of to information, right? Making my data available while keeping things safe. And if there's certainly benefits of having data available, especially in the age of analytics and so on. So I have a question that, even though it's technical, I think it goes into a philosophical situation. It says, part of our utility has their SCADA systems accessible through the internet. It says, whereas our sector is dead set against it, we have segmented network for our SCADA. The corporation wants us to put our own line for visibility to people in other locations. The question is, through your work, is there a preference from the security standpoint, and how can that be quantified?
Elkin, I think I can chime in on that. Please. One. I think what this individual Mark is dealing with is a rather common issue that I've seen pop up in the past. It's not so much about hanging your SCADA off of the internet. We've all seen the types of compromises that can come about as a result of it. It's about how you do it, right? The accessibility to it. What type of authentication and access controls are you putting around that, right? So I think it has to start primarily, and we always run into this. You can't really take cybersecurity in and of itself and say, this is what we're going to implement and this is the way it's got to be, and you know, disregard all the rest of your business operations. I mean, the reason why we have these problems or these problems are becoming more prevalent is because we're, you know, using mainstream IT networks now more from a business operations, business optimization standpoint, right? So there's a lot of scenarios out there that that comport to what this person asking the question entails. So I don't want to necessarily say, you know, don't segment your SCADA network, but at the very least, can you provide secure interfaces to it, which are remotely accessible? This happens in a lot of areas. There's always going to be I suppose my observation has been in my work with the utilities that there's going to be a need for somebody to engage remote access, if not just to check the status and health of the devices that are out there, right? You can't roll a truck 600-700 miles in the middle of one of the Dakotas to go check on the status of an energy operation or an operational device that's been out there and just has been set to run 24/7/365. That's costly economically. So now we tail back into the business operations aspect of it. It's how you do it. It's how are you going to make that particular device or SCADA or DCS accessible to be viewed by multiple parties. There's also methods of doing that in a secure manner. You could take that data and replicate it. I've seen some folks do this as well, and we're doing this as part of the project that I spoke of earlier. You can take the information, even if it's on a segmented network, and basically you could take the important components of that data and funnel it into some sort of cloud-based cloud application, which is accessible by multiple parties. So you may have cybersecurity people looking at the residual data that's important to host this visualization capability that everyone's interested. It's not necessarily a human-machine interface where you're looking at processes and whatnot, but you're actually looking at the data that comes about comes from the pertinent data that comes from that system. You don't necessarily have to get it from the system. You can replicate that data, implement some sort of cloud-based solution and have limited access to it based on whatever roles the individuals or the individuals who need access to that data play in your particular environment. So that's one of the ways we're approaching that particular challenge, and I really hope that helped.
Yeah, and if I could add to James's excellent response, I would say that, you know, nobody's saying that you should not have, you know, internet facing, industrial control systems or components of your system. I think that ship has clearly left the dock, and in some, particularly some rural systems, you may have, you know, a single operator who's responsible for multiple systems, and logistically the only way that individual can manage those systems is through internet-facing devices. But as James said, you know, you want to make sure you have basic practices. You know, do you have, you know, user authentication in place? Do you have basic protocols such as addressing the Ellsworth issue in Kansas, for example, is if you fire an employee, do you then you should have a protocol in place to then change passwords so that employee no longer has access, right? Again, there are basic steps that utilities can take. And I just want to reiterate one other point I mentioned during my presentation is one countermeasure is to install these independent cyber physical safety systems, right? These assume that you will be breached. These are systems that physically prevent dangerous conditions from occurring if the control system, is compromised, either through an insider or through an external threat actor. It could be as simple as the size of a chemical pump. Going to the Oldsmar is limit the maximum rate of pumping of a chemical additive. It could it could relate to certain types of gearing on valves and pressure switches and the like. The benefit of these types of controls in the water sector is that for a small system, that which might not have much cybersecurity capability, they can have operators who can access their system from the standpoint of what's the worst damage that bad guys could do if they took over our control systems. And so again, I want to emphasize the importance of that zero trust model of just building in, assume that you're going to be breached, and then build in design that addresses that breach, because most systems will be able to at least mitigate the consequences of a breach should one occur. Over.
Well, thank you, and yeah, certainly, I've seen as a good practice on water utilities to have drills and how to operate in case of a cyber attack, and understanding that for some utilities that's not possible because of the level of automation, and as Mark mentioned, the benefits of having automation comes with paying less for the service. So that's certainly something that some utilities can use and leverage. One question, staying on the technical side with Jim. Jim, how do you guys test, evaluate, certify, and validate the products you guys use?
We do none of the above. That's a really good question there, Elkin. I just want to make it clear to the audience that we are not a certification arm at all in terms of the products we use. I'll defer back to the presentation in the sense that once we decide to engage in a project, which has been vetted with mainly the community of interest that we have accessibility to, when we decide to move forward, we will solicit collaboration directly through the Federal Register notice. And what that does is it serves two purposes. Number one, as the Department of Commerce, right? We want to encourage participation. So one of the criteria we have is basically anyone who wishes to participate must have a commercially available product. And I will say to the audience here, the product is perhaps more incidental to the capability. We don't showcase particular products. We don't pick winners or losers or anything like that. By virtue of responding to that Federal Register notice, if a particular company's capability is something that we're looking for, then we select them based on a first come, first served basis, and then we engage with them by way of a collaborative research and development agreement. Some folks may be familiar with what that is. It's very common in company to academic settings to bring guest researchers on. It's one of the vehicles we use to bring folks on board with us. So great question. I just want to make it clear that we're not evaluating the products themselves at all. These products are being brought to bear to form a solution based on one of these cybersecurity challenges, which was for all intents and purposes initiated by industry through us and with us.
Thank you. And we're coming to the end. We have a few minutes left, so I think we can use this time to I want to ask you one question to each one of you. Is if you want one or two things for the people listening to this webinar to take from this discussion, one or two things what would that be? And I would start with Michael. I think you're muted, Michael.
How many months have we been doing this?
Still the same.
Sorry. I guess I would just say that, you know, there are resources out there, and sometimes it's hard to track them down, but there are some good resources out there. We need more of them at different skill levels, like David said, but there's some good stuff out there, and we can help you find them.
Thank you, David. I think David may have issues, may not be hearing me. Jim, something you want people listening to this webinar or watching it to take from this discussion and remember?
Yes, one of the common symptoms we see is, you know, folks that are trying to implement good cybersecurity are oftentimes perhaps a little bit overwhelmed with where to start, who to go to, what to do, and things like that. This is, I just want to, it can be overwhelming, especially if you're not all that sophisticated in your own in your own area of cybersecurity, that you need to develop more expertise. And there are a lot of resources, as Michael said. I'd say, you know, point to the people that have some sort of authority, like in this case, it's EPA and David and the Water ICEAC. Look to them, because it's and collaborate with people as much as you can. Try to find, you know, that's one of the things that I think makes NCCOE a rather good option for folks, is there's really no barriers to entry. I just wrote to a couple of people and said, you can contact me directly. I'll tell you what I know. But again, anything I say doesn't carry any regulatory authority. It's just good cybersecurity guidance that I have to offer, if it helps complement what you're attempting to do. But again, try not to be overwhelmed. There are solutions to all of the challenges that we're faced with. And, you know, I will say that in terms, one last thing I'll say, Elkin, real quick, is that we are developing in our sophistication in terms of being able to offer more comprehensive guidance to folks out there, which I think is just going to help every sector and every industry out there in the time to come. But this is not going to go away anytime soon. I think we're all relatively in agreement on that, right?
Yeah. When we started in working on the control system for the utility I work with in 2003, cybersecurity was not even a question that you would ask. It was until 2009 when we started thinking, oh, maybe we have to pay attention to this. And it's been a long road.
Right, right.
David?
Exactly.
I don't know if you, can you hear me now, David? You want something?
I can, Elkin. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I do, David. So do you have something you want the people watching us to take from this discussion? One or two things?
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate something I said to lead off the discussion that I made, and to kind of reinforce what James just said, which is that basic cyber security practices, which should include a cyber response plan, can prevent many of the types of attacks that we've discussed today and that we see across the country, and that they can mitigate the consequences if such an attack should occur. And as I also mentioned, you know, a cybersecurity program does not need to involve a sophisticated and expensive technological response. It could be a change in your internal protocols. It could be practicing operating on manual, that sort of thing. So I would encourage, despite the prevalence and increasing prevalence of cyber attacks, I would encourage utilities not to get discouraged, but pick up, for example, that ICEAC 15 best practices, read through it. If you outsource through a vendor, make sure your vendor's familiar with it and what your expectations are, and go from there. But this is not an insurmountable challenge for our sector. Over.
Mark?
Thanks. First, I would pick up on some of the things that Michael and David said in their reports, in their initial discussions. And I'd say the number one thing you can do is just practice good business cyber hygiene. I mean, if we only did that, we would eliminate just a large percentage of the problems we have. And whether you're doing it through a managed service provider, depending on your size, or whether you're doing it yourself, it's really about password management, access control, the patch management, the internet foundational internet issues like DMARC and DNS, your domain registration. There's about 10 steps you can take, or that you can assure your MSP is taking, and that your workers are then taking in support, because your MSP can't log in for your workers. If you do that basic cyber hygiene, you will eliminate the vast majority of these negative incidents. They will find a softer underbelly than you, and a weaker link in the chain than you. And that's the goal, is if we can raise everybody up so eventually there just aren't those weak, soft underbellies, we'll be in a lot better position. But right now, our critical infrastructure is generally one large soft underbelly.
Thank you, Mark. So it's funny you mentioned this. We got a last minute question saying, should the end of useful life of an equipment be driven by cybersecurity concerns instead of typical age of equipment? I would answer saying, if you're running a Windows 7 system, you cannot patch it anymore. So you need to get something newer. So yes, cybersecurity is now an element of that decision making on the life cycle of an equipment. With that said, we're coming to an end. This webinar will be it's being recorded. It will be posted on the TVN Alliance website. And I just want to say thank you to the panelists. I appreciate your collaboration. I think we had a great discussion, and hopefully the people that are watching this webinar are walking out with new knowledge from here and can help us improve cybersecurity in the sector. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Elkin. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Elkin. Thank you.